Committee meeting for Thursday, May 11th. Any declarations of conflict or pecuniary interest? I see none. Minutes of the previous meeting. I seem to be getting back up on this. Am I? Does it seem like an echo to you people or no? Okay, I'm sorry, it must be me. Okay, the minutes of the previous meeting, please. Can I have a mover and seconder? Member Ganzel, Member Marshall. Any comments or questions on the minutes? All those in favor? Carried. New business, the NRPS bylaw enforcement and licensing unit statement of operations for 2016. A mover and seconder, please. Member Bonham, Member Caslin. Comments or questions on this? Member Marshall.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Laura for preparing this for us. I guess it stands out that we're not recovering all our direct costs, let alone our indirect costs. So, pardon me, we'll have to, at our next meeting, discuss how we're going to make full recovery. We can't let licensing be subsidized by other departments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So I have questions, Laura or whoever. I'll go through you, Detective Sergeant Laban, I guess. I'm trying to read my scribble. It says the direct costs from the region are $45,468. I apologize for my scribble here. My question is the property from there was a property charge from the region. Is that because we have a new building that they're higher? Because it said the property charge is higher, I believe in the report.
So through you to the chair. The region does charge us for property maintenance costs, and the $45,000 includes property maintenance, and it would include all the costs associated to all the buildings within the police services. So it does include the HQ costs as well.
So it's more now than it was a year ago when we were on James Street because of the
Correct.
Facility?
Yes.
How much more? Can you tell me a percentage or dollar-wise compare what we were paying and what we're paying now? If you can't, you can get back to me if you don't mind.
Yes, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, and also in the labels for the items, the region chargebacks, the notes are in G. And I do not have a G unless I'm missing it here on the next operating statement. Where is the G?
Sorry,
I know that's the G, but it says, I'm looking for the note for G.
Yeah, there's no breakdown. I didn't provide the breakdown of the regional chargebacks that make up the $45,000.
May I get that sometime and send it to the board?
Yes.
Or send it to Deb?
Yeah, but I just want to clarify that I split the two reports between the question that was asked at the last board meeting, which was that there were several inconsistencies between some of the financial information that was provided. And then there was also the question around what is the actual typical costs of the bylaw and licensing. So I did separate the two reports. This one here is just reporting back on some of those inconsistencies. So when this report was first done back in December, we reported on October financials. We were then asked to include the fleet costs. So when we came back in February, what we decided to do was revise the figures based on the 2016 actuals. So at that time, we were just allocating regional chargebacks based on what the region charges us. So regional chargebacks are centrally reported, and they're not allocated to any individual department within the service. So this particular report, it was an exercise in just saying, here are the direct costs of the bylaw, and here are a portion of the regional chargebacks that are allocated to the service that on a percentage basis would belong to bylaw. So I can give you the background to the regional chargebacks that make up the 45, but when we get into the other report, that's a report where I really worked more on what are typical indirect charges that would be charged to bylaw for if they were independently running their services. Okay, so I can provide you with the 45, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about the other report, there's a bit of difference in the take on the other methodology.
Okay, so you have an advanced degree and stuff like this? I'm a layman, so make it so that I can understand it, please, or
I will.
everybody else here is smarter than me, but dumb it down to me, will you, please? Thank
will.
you. Any other questions on this side? I'll go, Member Stewart?
Thank you, Chair, and through you, just a question that I perhaps will certainly wait for an answer for, but I'm just curious, as we're getting to the point now where the costs are being greater than the revenues, and I know we're supposed to be getting a report in July, but I'm really looking for what I'll nickname the Uber effect, and that is the workload regarding Uber versus the revenue and how it compares with the rest of licensing. As I know that if we're going to be looking at raising licensing fees, we're going to get some certainly blowback from a lot of people who say it's not my fault that they're going up. And somehow the big new, quote, elephant in the room has been adding Uber to the mix in the last year. So I don't imagine you have the answer now, just from what's here, but I'd be looking to certainly get some more in-depth on that aspect of it to know whether or not if licensing needs to be increased. If it's because of the Uber effect, then the licensing increase should be directed in that direction. If it's overall, then we spread it overall. So I guess that's kind of the answer I'm looking for in the future to deal with the issue of balancing out the revenues and the expenses for the department. So I guess my question right now is, can you say, yes, we'll put that in the future report, or unless you have the answer now, which I'm not anticipating?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think the answer to that is twofold, and yes, I will be putting forward a report with respect to the Uber effect, as you call it, for July, as we talked about. The other thing that I did speak to with finance about, and I think it's been brought up before, is there is an annual cost of living increase every year for everything, including our costs, of course, in mostly the indirect allocations. So that's something we might want to consider in a small percentage increase annually, as opposed to large increases after 5 or 10 or 15 years, where it makes it more difficult. But so I think there's two parts to that, and the Uber question will definitely come up in the July report.
Okay, thank you. I'll look forward to that. Thanks.
Member Caslin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of, I'll add a comment first. A lot of the services that we provide through the region to the public, such as transit or policing, don't make money, even though there's fees and, in police's case, there's tickets, and transit, there's bus fares, don't make money. In this particular case, what is the history of this particular file? Is it expected to break even, lose money, or make money?
I think Woody should answer that, shouldn't you, on that one? It's supposed to be a zero balance at the end.
Yeah, it should be cost recovery.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in that case, being new to the board, how has the performance been over the past several years?
We've had report going back several years. There have been reports that have come in. I think there was an adjustment made about 4 or 5 years ago when a full financial report came in. I don't know if you were even here yet, Laura, probably not. And it showed that there was a deficit. And so things were adjusted at that point to make it cost recovery. I think, I'm going by memory, Alan, but I believe that it's been fairly close, other than that one time when a full report came in with all these sort of indirect charges added in. I think it's been fairly close to being cost recovery. This year, you can see from here, it's short. Historically, I think it's been close. And when you look at cost recovery, I don't think that you look at it, you can't take a snapshot of 6 months or even a year. You've got to look at it over a period of time, because the revenue goes up and down from different aspects of the licensed industry, or different of the licensed industries, and also the cost, the enforcement and that sort of thing goes up and down as well. So over a period of 5 years, the goal would probably be to be cost recovery, and I think it's been pretty close.
Member Stewart, do you want to respond to his question?
I could just add a bit, being I was chair of licensing in prior years. And what happened one year, it was the year that Coventry Connections came in and purchased Central and 5-0 and whatever it is, and there was a big influx of money because of changeover fees. And there was questions about, oh, we're going to have this big surplus. So at that time, we said, well, before we start looking at the surplus, let's look and get a whole costing of the unit to make sure that it really is. And we found out that we were operating at about $75,000 to $100,000 a year deficit. So it was paid out of the tax base rather than being the cost recovery model that it's supposed to be. So at that time, we ended up actually making a fairly significant increase to licensing fees. They hadn't been increased for about 10 years. And at that time, we had made a decision that the board should be taking every 2 to 3 years and reviewing this to make sure we're still within reasonableness of cost recovery. You know, it's hard to match it up dollar for dollar, but, you know, within a bit. So that's what happened, and probably, as I mentioned in my question earlier, we've had some new significant change, and that's the Uber licensing and whatever it is. And so I think it's time to review again to make sure that we're lining up properly to recover the costs as closely as possible. So that's a little history that might help.
Yeah.
So just a point, in our next report, we have the 2017 budget, which shows the deficit. We should probably ask more of those questions based on that. That's where we showed the 17.6%, I'm sorry, 16.2% cost being up in that.
Okay,
So,
I do have a couple more questions.
by all means.
So you can't measure, you can't manage what you don't measure. So how do we in fact measure this? I mean, this is historical, so too late. This is done. How do we manage to control the cost to a break-even point if that's the expectation?
Well, I'll quickly respond to that. In the next report, it more or less suggests that they're going to have to increase fees to manage these deficits. So
Okay, let's go down that path. Why wasn't it done before now?
that I cannot answer. But then again, I'll defend the Uber costs were unknown, and that's was one of the headaches that we had with how much that would cost in 2016 and in 2015 negotiating with Uber. But
I'll cut it a little shorter. So what this tells me is that we don't have a system in place to manage this break-even point that we're looking for. And, you know, we wait until after the fact, we get the report, then we say, oh, it's in a deficit position. What caused it? And we do an analysis of it. Why don't we put a system in place whereby we manage to the expected end and monitor it by month?
Laura, can you comment to that, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't here at the time when the last licensing fees were increased, which was 2014, and I understand that had been an increase that had occurred, and the last one was 10 years even before that. I would agree with you in terms of establishing a fee structure that covers costs, and I have addressed it in the next report. One of the things you have to be careful with the one that you're looking at is it's based on 2016 actuals. There was a lot of anomalies in 2016. One of the things was that there was a bylaw officer vacancy for a majority of the year that was only filled in, I believe, early November. The other factor in the 2016 actuals is that there was a significant increase in legal fees, which is an anomaly. And that's one of the reasons why I submitted the second report, which looked at what is a baseline average operating cost for bylaw. And in that one, it definitely addresses the shortfall. What I found interesting about the second report, which is the exercise that we did, is that not only doesn't it cover total costs, it doesn't even cover the direct costs. And I think that's, if you consider the fact that the last time the bylaw fees were increased in 2014, we've had salary increases in 15. And of course, now we have them in 16. So at minimum, and I know Craig and I have had this conversation, at minimum, the fees should at least go up on an annual basis based on a inflationary impact. And had that been done, you probably would have had less of a shortfall in your direct costs. Now, to speak to what are the true costs that you should be applying when you're looking at a full cost recovery, in public sector, that's really difficult. And I checked the Municipal Act to see whether there was any definition in terms of what are considered recoverable costs. And we can get into more of that conversation in the second report, but I think it's really careful to identify what costs should bylaw be recovering. Is it its direct costs, or is there direct costs plus some type of overhead costs, which I had addressed in the next report. So in terms of the history of the fee increases, my understanding is it's not done on a regular basis. And the exercise that we've provided from a finance perspective is only asked upon us when it's directed by the committee.
Okay, so thank you. I started the conversation about, do we expect it to make money or lose money or break even? The answer was, we expect it to break even. And here we are, after the fact, trying to dissect what has taken place, but yet there's no management tool in place to manage it during the process. So if we in fact want this to break even, and that's our expectation, then we need to have a management process in place that monitors and manages those costs and changes them on a real-time basis. Otherwise, we can't sit here and say, what happened? Because we didn't manage it. Thank you.
Well, at the least, we should be going up by inflation every year. But Member Marshall, then Member Gansel.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Through you to Lisa. Gotta get my glasses on. Specialty allowance, what is that, Lisa, or Laura?
That's the detective pay. That is a formula that's based on the difference between a constable and a staff sergeant. Okay. And that is paid out once a year at the end of the year.
Thank you. I don't see any depreciation or gasoline charge in this. Is this part of the allocation from the region?
The fleet costs, the $19,000, that includes both amortization of the 4 vehicles. It also includes fuel costs and an average for maintenance costs over the lifespan of the 4 vehicles.
So those costs are all included, and where are they right now?
They are not charged to bylaw directly. They actually, the maintenance costs for the fleet vehicles, for the bylaw vehicles, and the gas are charged actually to the fleet department. So in this exercise, the figure that's referred to as direct costs are the actual costs that are charged directly to bylaw. Then what we did is we added the fleet costs for the 4 vehicles, and amortization is not budgeted, nor is it charged to the service. So again, that was based on the lifespan of the bylaw vehicles, which are about 8 years, divided by the cost of the vehicle. And it worked out to about $12,000 for the 4 vehicles in terms of an amortization cost.
Oh, so we just do it strictly on the purchase price and divide it over that expected years, is that right?
True, yes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Member Gansel.
I'll wait for the next report.
Okay. Anyone else with questions, or I'll ask mine? Oh, I'm sorry, Chief.
I'd just like to point out, if I may, and we've talked about this in the past at this board, there are many other cities and regions, the police service is not involved in this part of business whatsoever. And we've suggested in the past that there's, it would be wise for the region to consider to do this through their bylaw enforcement. But that's not been the case. I'm advised also that in the past, we have recommended to the board about the continuing increase or an inflationary increase, but that hasn't happened. And just in finality, in relation to Member Caslin's comment, if the board wishes to do that, then it's the board's authority to do so if you want to add those increases. It's not up to Craig. We can make recommendations to you and tell you, point out these, the frailties in the revenue stream, and if the board chooses, they direct us to do that. So if the board wants to put a process in place that elevates those, the revenues during the course of the year as things change, then we'll be prepared to follow that.
Thank you, Chief, and I know Member Castle right now is making a motion, but I have a couple questions in the meantime. I know we're assessing Uber's costs to us and the whole Uber situation in July. Am I correct on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
So at that time, we'll have a more realistic cost on deficits or being in the positive at all. I don't expect a lot of good out of that, but I'm hoping. So by July, we'll have real-time costs on what we're doing and be able to get to figure it out. Should I be comfortable with that statement?
I'm definitely going to have some recommendations based on my research and based on what we've been dealing with respect to Uber in the past, well, it'll be a year at the time.
Okay, I have questions that can be related to both these reports. I know I have a question, when was the last increase? And I couldn't agree with the chief more. Like, I don't know why boards many times ago didn't go inflation every year, at least inflation every year. But, I have wire costs up 16.2%, but that's in the next report, so I'll ask that then. So I'll go to Member Castlin. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward a motion that, that staff implement a monitoring and management system to the expected break-even point on a monthly basis and report to the board as necessary.
Can we add in there about inflation every year? Or,
That's part of managing it.
okay.
I wrote it down for you. Just gotta be able to read it.
Okay, Deb, can you read that out once more? And I'll look for a seconder, please.
That the committee recommend that staff implement a monitoring and management system. Okay, sorry, reading the writing, to the expected break-even point on a monthly basis and report to the board as necessary.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? I can't. There is no seconder for that motion. Member Bonham, are you seconding it, or are you? Friendly amendment? Sure. You're seconding it, and you want to add a friendly amendment. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's an amendment. I'm just a little bit concerned about, as Laura said, there's anomalies that happen. And if we're too quick to react on a monthly basis, we're going to be, instead of doing this, we're going to be doing this. There's going to be a whole lot of noise in the system where we're trying to correct and overcorrect. I would assume we're not going to be in the business of cutting charges. To maintain a balance. And as I understand the system, it's kind of iterative in the sense that, following Member Caslin's observation, that we look at it and then we make an adjustment, look at it and make an adjustment. So I'm a little bit concerned that we would be asking people to monitor it on a monthly basis as opposed to maybe quarterly or half-yearly, so that we have a chance for the white noise, so to speak, to work its way out and truly represent whether or not there's been a shift up or down in revenues versus costs, and on that basis adjust the charges. So my concern is it's too frequent, and we're going to be chasing our tail too often based on the current amendment motion of doing it monthly.
Okay, I was going to suggest quarterly. Would you accept quarterly as a friendly amendment?
I'm fine with it, but I just want to reiterate that this is a staff initiative, not a board initiative.
Right.
So I'm simply asking staff, just like any other business would do on monthly reports, is to look at their monthly reports and make the necessary adjustments as necessary, whether it's quarterly, whether it's bi-yearly, doesn't matter. I'm just suggesting that waiting until the end of the year and looking surprised at the report is unacceptable.
Okay, so we have a mover on it, we have a seconder on it. Comments from the board on this? Member Stewart?
I think one of the issues, I certainly agree with the monitoring, but rates are set annually. I believe that's in the bylaw. I could be corrected, but I believe it is. I think if we wish to adjust annually, a much better approach would be to, usually in the fall, any kind of changes, we hold a public meeting of our licensees and whatever and advise them. So, for example, we've got a restating of the 2017. Well, at the time the fees were set, we didn't have a contract, we didn't have any of those scenarios to really finite our costs. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on this year, and I think this fall we will need to look at resetting licensing with our best estimates as to the 2018 year. Most of these licenses, we couldn't adjust anything more frequently because people buy an annual license. They don't buy a monthly license. So this is why I think that we need to look at a more annualized basis and best estimates for costs of licensing and recovery. And I agree that, you know, there's two things to look at, the revenues and the expenditures, if there's things we can do on either side of the equation to make them go. But I don't see us adjusting anything on a monthly basis, so therefore I think we just need these reports in a timely fashion to set the licensing rates for the following year. And so I don't agree with the motion as it is currently worded. I agree with the concept of getting it closer together.
Okay, the motion doesn't say that we have to adjust the rates. It says more or less that we're monitoring it every quarter. So it doesn't say we have to change the rates at that time.
But I guess what I'm saying though is well, is it changed every quarter now? Because it was every month when the motion was made. Now
It's every quarter. But it
Okay.
doesn't say that we have to change the rates every quarter. It says we get a statement from Laura saying where we stand
Yeah.
every quarter, and then we would react to what the statement is. Am I correct in my, more or less, it's more monitoring for us to figure out where we stand as the year goes by rather than finding out a year later.
Then I guess my question and comment would go back to licensing staff and to say, because people renew on an annual basis, does, for example, revenue come in largely in one part of the year and not another? Is the revenue coming in spaced over the year? In other words, those are things that can really skewer your vision of a quarterly report. You say, oh, everything's great because look at all the revenue we got in, but the next quarter, people are just riding on the licenses they've already paid for. But the expenses keep going on quarter by quarter. So this is what I'm wondering of how that would be affected, and maybe we should get some information on that.
Okay, Laura or Detective Sergeant Laban, is what we're asking for realistic, or like, can you find a line knowing what your income's coming from the people through the year to know where we stand?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So to answer Member Stewart's question, the one thing that might skew that is our renewals for many of the licenses occur in March, April, and May. So there might be a skewed revenue stream during those 3 months. But with respect to the motion, if you could read the entirety of the motion again, now that it's might have been changed, and then I can...
Deb will read it, but this happens in business too. We know tourist season's in the summer. We know that it's coming, so you don't get all excited in May, you get excited or depressed in September if you haven't made it. So I consider this somewhat around the same, but go ahead, Deb, read it again, will you please?
That the committee recommend that licensing staff implement a monitoring and management system to the expected break-even point on a quarterly basis and report to the board as necessary.
Do you have a problem with that? Please, we're open here, like, if this is unrealistic, or we recognize there's peaks and valleys on this, but we have to monitor it better than what we want, and this is the intent of Member Casson and Member Bonham on this. So are we asking too much, and tell me why if we are?
No, through you, Mr. Chair. It's not unlike what we do currently with our service variance report. Again, one of the things to consider is that you will have actual data, you will have anomalies, and also timing. I agree with Craig in terms of timing of your revenue base. I think at the end, perhaps your September, your Q3 will be a little bit more representative of your position. The only thing that I ask is, and we can talk about it with the second report, is whether you want just the direct costs and the fleet costs associated to, that are charged to the bylaw department, or whether in that report, do you want us to apply, I'm going to throw a number out, like a 15% allocation of overhead costs to completely consider the full cost recovery model.
Thank you. I guess I'm going to look at it the other way around, and it says report as necessary. What I'm trying to mitigate is the shock and awe at the end of the year. You didn't tell us we're in a deficit situation, what's going on? There's no other department at the region that we run by guessing and then looking at the numbers at the end of the year. Every department in the region is run the same, and you've alluded to it already, that you look at it on a monthly basis to see where you're tracking, and that's just the way we do business. In this case, it just appears that we haven't done that, and that we waited until the end of the year, and now the board is surprised at the deficit. So to eliminate the surprise, can we look at it a little closer so that at the end of the year, if it's expected to be a break even, we're either successful or not successful. If we're not successful in making the break even, what happened? What are the countermeasures so that we don't have that reoccur?
Who had the floor? That's the original, or?
I did, but I don't need, Alan just said it.
Okay, go ahead, Woody, and then Terry.
No, I don't need to say anything, Alan just said it.
Terry.
I'm just wondering, in order to make the report more representative and less overreactive, is there something we could do with the revenue in terms of smoothing? So that despite the fact it comes in a small calendar period of time, can we smooth that so that we're not reacting and we're not receiving reports that 2 months from now are going to be seen as, nuisance as opposed to actual news? Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that also providing a forecast, and that helps to look at the actuals plus, and we can base that on prior history. So a forecast will probably help with that smoothing impact. Okay.
Thank you.
Member Marshall.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to remind this board that we originally asked for a report on the licensing about Uber for December, but this board pushed those reports back, the availability, and I think it's now July. And that was because of the impact was unknown, and we weren't sure what was going to happen. By all means, I think we need to recover our costs, and I think the motion as put forward, it has validity to it. It needs to be done. Whether we can do it on a quarterly basis and change rates, I don't think we can. I think we have to do it on an annual basis. But if that report was made to us in the end of September, we could make that, we still have time to include it in our budgets. So that would be my recommendation.
Any other comments? One thing I'd like to clear up, Member Bonham, you made the comment that we can't assume that our charges will be cut on any of this stuff. I wouldn't assume anything on this stuff, because we find as a result that we're up by 16.2% like the next report. And I understand why we are. We haven't been charging inflation and things like this. But if we were charging all these things and we're up 16.2%, then the chief would be looking at why this is and be looking at some cuts on different things possibly. And that because we can't allow for stuff like this. I recognize it doesn't happen too often, but I would hope that we would look at these things. And I side with getting a quarterly report to keep us, as long as it's not taking a lot of your time, to give us an idea of what's happening and what's coming up. This has been a different year because of Uber, because all the headaches that we had, starting in July last year, and then the criminal background checks that were backed up for so long, and then those were cleared up, and there were so many headaches going on. I'll be interested to see how the July report comes, based on Uber's forecast and our forecast and things like this, but it doesn't hurt us for a quarterly report, just to advise us, but to react right away and say, okay, because this quarter we're down, we're going to increase the rates. I don't think anybody's suggesting that, let alone our bylaws say we can't do that. So I agree with that. But if there was something devastating in this business that would cause us to, then we can change the bylaw if we had to. Don't ever recommend that, but, you know, this is just a quarterly report like any business would have to show us how we're standing as we're going along through the year. So I would support that, but, okay, we're done with the conversation. When you heard the motion, we have a mover, we have a seconder. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, now all those in favor, are we done with that report? Any other questions on that report? All those in favor of receiving this report? Okay, now we're on to the next report, which is item number 3, NRPS Bylaw Enforcement Licensing Unit Full Cost Monitoring for the 2017 budget. A lot of this has been discussed already, but can I have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor, please? Member Bonham, Member Marshall, comments or questions on this part of the this report for 2017? Member Ganzel.
For you, Chair, and maybe to Lisa here on this, are you telling us that based on what I'm looking at, which would be page number 5, that at the present time, that 16.2% is what would be in your estimation / recommendation, requirement to bring this to a neutral, in other words, a break-even point?
Through you to the chair, I'm going to be very careful about recommending anything at this point. What this exercise was to show what is an atypical annual cost of bylaw, given that we did try to do a 3-year average on the actual cost, and there was far too many anomalies year over year. So the 2017 budget is fairly representative of what it costs to run the bylaw unit. We added the impact of the latest NRPA settlements, and we also looked at what is atypical charges that the bylaw unit would incur if we took the bylaw unit out of HQ and put them into a strip mall. What other costs would they incur? And that's what the $55,000 charges that you see in the indirect allocation. So from the exercise that we did, it does suggest that you would have to increase your revenues by 16.2% to cover those costs. What we didn't do in this analysis is any revenue sensitivity analysis of what the revenues would be impacted if you did indeed increase by 16%. I don't have enough history on the increases in the revenues over the last 10 years, but I'm not sure that by increasing it by 16%, whether there may be a drop or a loss in revenue, and that's something that has to be considered. But this exercise, the one thing that I learned from this was, at minimum, it's not even covering its direct costs, and that would be the costs of the bylaw unit plus the $20,000 towards their fleet. You'd have to increase your revenues by 7.6% to just cover those direct costs. And Craig and I were talking about, had we applied an inflationary impact of, let's say, 2%, on those 2014 rates year over year, you would have pretty much covered that gap that you have just in the direct. So again, I'm on the fence when it comes to what is truly a full cost recovery in establishing user fees in public sector. But I did take a very conservative approach in allocating costs to the bylaw that they would incur if they were independently run. And the costs that I added was the cost of insurance, the cost of rent and utilities, the cost of finance, and the cost of IT services. And that was basic. So just those costs included in with their direct and their fleet costs would suggest that revenues would have to go up by 16%.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, then the next page over, which would page number 6 here, called Appendix B, I'm looking at the 2017 budget, which is the restated amounts. Is the inference there of at 3.38%? Again, in this case, we're short. In other words, we're operating the unit below the neutral position or the cost recovery position. If I look at that 3.38, is that an increase that would bring it to zero, and bring it to a neutral?
Appendix B was provided to just demonstrate the impact of the NRPA settlement. So I wanted to make sure that the board understood, or the committee understood, that if you do increase your fees for 2017, that you need to consider the fact that direct costs or salary costs are going to increase in 18 and 19 just from the settlement. So you need to take into consideration that either you want to increase your fees to cover the costs that you know you're going to be incurring in the next 2 years, or establish maybe an inflationary increase. So the 3.38% there just represents the current 2017 budget with the NRPA settlement impact.
Okay, thank you. I'll be making a motion later on.
Member Marshall?
Yes, just clarification, please. Does that include the senior officers? Are they included in that number?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are no senior officers in bylaw. So it does reflect the NRPA settlement, but in bylaw, there are no senior officers charged to that account or that department.
Terry?
Thank you, through you, Chair, and to Laura. On Appendix B, the 3.38%, that's just to recover the incremental cost as a result of the collective agreement. Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct.
So if I look at 2018, if we increase by 3.38% in 2017, the 1.7% in 2018 would be in addition to the 3.38, again, to equilibrate labor costs?
Sorry, yes, that's correct. That's a year over year.
Thanks very much.
Okay, any other questions from the board? Okay, no member Ganzel's going to have a motion, but I have a question. Just when does the bylaw, and I guess this is to Detective LeBon, when does the bylaw say that we increase rates if and when we're going to do it? Because we know we have to go up at least inflation. Or Woody?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think Woody might be able to answer that
Okay.
better. I believe it's annually as
But when? What date annually?
Usually, there's a public meeting in the fall, and that's when the determination is made about the rates.
Okay.
That's the way it's been done for
Okay.
40 years or so.
Obviously, we're going to wait for the Uber report before we do anything.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a lot of the questions that you're answering here are going to be asked again in July when we get to the Uber thing, and I think some of the answers may fall out of what comes in on that.
Okay, member Ganzel.
Well, I'm reluctant to make the motion if we're going to have another debate or another discussion in July, but what I was originally proposing, and I'm only going to throw this out as a comment, not as a motion, that we would increase our rates as soon as possible through the appropriate hearings to 5%. And I threw a date out of July 1st, even though I think now it's going to be the fall. July 1st of this year, running through to basically the end of 2018. And as part of this meeting or discussion on rates, that we would, at that point in time, also increase the rates an additional 2% to take effect on January 1st, 2019. I only have numbers for 3 years. The 5%, what I was doing there is I was basically trying to cover off the increases that I see on this report for 2017 and 2018 sort of stabilize us there at the 5%, and then at the end of December of 2018, so taking effect on the 1st of January of 2019, a further 2%, which again covers off what is projected on this based on salaries as to what the shortfall would be. That would basically bring us back in line to a balanced budget. But in fairness to the Uber report to come forward and maybe more refinement of these numbers, maybe it won't, maybe it will be even less attractive, and 5% may not be enough. So I think that's why we should wait. Thank you.
So what you're saying is you just went around a whole circle there, and we're back to, okay. Okay, so we're going to wait till July, and then we'll assess it after your report, but certainly there has to be an increase somewhere, so. Any other questions on this report? All those in favor of receiving this? Carried. Now we're into new business. I have a question, but anyone else have any new business on this? Okay, I'll ask. Detective Sergeant Laban, I sent you an email, and you know I'm coming with this about towing licenses. The question made to me by a citizen was that, and I'll try and get this right, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that if you're a big enough outfit that owns property in 4 or 5 different municipalities, Niagara Falls, Welland, or whatever, you still can only have one license for those municipalities, even though you might have a storage yard in Niagara Falls, a storage yard in Welland, storage yard in St. Catharines. You can't be a towing outfit. You can't be on the police list for towing in 3 different places. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, to answer, so there's 2 things in that statement that the member of the public
Yep.
made to you, and there was definitely some confusion. You can have as many businesses as you want in Niagara. The tow license is a regional license. So if you have compounds in different municipalities, you can operate throughout the region. The difference is, with respect to the toll rotation agreement, being on the police call-out list, which is a private agreement, that's where, after consultation with the tow industry, and we had a meeting back in October, where all the tow operators, the owners, agreed this was the best way to move forward, to limit the amount of companies on the lists to make it more fair for everybody. So now, after consulting with legal, we're putting together amendments to the toll rotation agreement, and we're bringing that to the industry on this coming Monday on the 15th, which will limit companies to 2 spots in the region, and they have to be in different municipalities. And the whole reasoning behind that was the complaints from the industry itself about too many people doing basically end-arounds the agreement, the original agreement, and developing, putting companies in other people's names, but still having a controlling interest and basically not playing fair.
So if I'm a totally legit company, playing fair, and I do have 5 yards throughout the region, I'm big enough to have it, then, and hypothetical, then should I not be offended that I'm only getting 2 spots? I'm just trying to alleviate another email to me of a complaint. How do you solve that and be fair to a company that might have, is there any companies first that have 3 or 4 yards around the region? Or am I just making up something that there is? I see a nod. So would that person be complaining to me then that why aren't I on the towing list in Welland, a towing list in Niagara Falls or whatever with your dispatch? Is that
Well, and Mr. Chair, as I said, this all came about from the industry itself.
Okay.
And we had consensus at the last meeting in October. So if anybody's complaining now, it wasn't brought up at that meeting.
Okay.
And we are having another meeting Monday.
So you're going to bring it up with them and discuss it anyways? I'll leave
Correct.
it in
Yes,
your
sir.
hands. If you can let me know after that meeting, though, what was resolved, I'd appreciate it.
Yes.
Good. Any other comments in licensing? Okay, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. We'll be going into finance immediately coming up.
Thank you, Bob. We'll start in 5 minutes. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? Seeing none, I'll move ahead. First, item 1 is the board reserves. I'm a mover and seconder to bring it forward, please. Member Caslin, Member Stewart, thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Bonham, this is for you, Head. Terry? So this is, you requested this report, and I just wonder if you had any comments on it?
No, I didn't realize that reserves, et cetera, were that orchestrated, here at the finance committee, and so I've gone through it, and it looks like. You told me to turn it off a while ago, Bob. I can turn it on now? Thank you. I didn't realize that the reserves were this orchestrated. And when I looked at the different types, it doesn't appear to me there's much opportunity for combination as opposed under the guise of common purpose, that each and every one is sort of a separate bailiwick. And looking at the background information from the region, it looks like for the most part, there is a pretty reasoned definition of what percentage of some kind of income in different jurisdictions each reserve is capped at. So I don't know how much flexibility we got. I'm noting some are in deficit, so that there needs to be something done there with regard to transfers from our budget. But my comment would be that having reviewed it, I'm satisfied that we've covered the landscape and that there isn't much chance for combination. And in fact, there's some evidence that we may have to be transferring more funds to make up some deficits. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, you know, I think what we've seen is a result of trying to keep our budgets down and going into the reserves and depleting some of those reserves, you know, and the piper has to be paid. We're going to need to bring in more revenue from the operations to restore the negative balance, and also to build some reserves for a rainy day. But I don't think that's the purpose of today's meeting. Yes, Member Caslin.
And thank you. You're absolutely right, Mr. Chair. And I just would like to reiterate, my position is that I would rather set a stretch target and meet 90% of it than set a 110% target and just sit back and use up all the money. So I think your comments are correct, and I'm pleased with what we've been able to achieve over the past few years with low budgets and low budget increases. And I think, you know, even if we don't achieve, we've achieved a significant measure over the long term in keeping our budgets low.
Thank you. Yes, Bob.
Yeah, and to reiterate that, when I was elected 3 years ago, I guess it was, that one of the comments made by some of the constituents were the reserves at the region. At that time, I didn't know police reserves, but we're sitting on this bankroll of money and no one's ever using it. And I know it's, that the region might be used for floods or whatever the case may be. But a lot of people were happy that we were using some of these reserves. Now, I recognize we should never deplete them to zero, and they're probably too low right now. So we've already said, and the chief knows, that next year is going to be a tough year. And the budgeting this year is going to be a tough time for next year. But it's nice that we took a look at all these things and utilized some of it. So, thank you.
We have a motion to receive. All in favor? Thank you very much. We'll go to item 2, financial variance report. Can I have a mover and a seconder to enter the secretary? Mr. Bonham, Member Bonham, Mr. Member Gale. Any discussion? There being none, no discussion, then all in favor? That's passed. Any other business to be brought forward? Then committee meeting is over. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Can I get a little plaque on the wall? Yes.
Thank you, Chief. Ryan?